So before we get in, or to whatever it is we're going to get into today, would you, or does anyone have any questions about what you talked about last week, or anything that you've been thinking about this week? So if not, I wanted to continue on from where I left off a couple of weeks ago. And that was beginning to get into the feminine side of the masculine-feminine equation. Oh,
Hi, Shell.
hey, Sheldon.
I'm gonna do a black blob today.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure out how I can make the light a little bit better. It took me a long time before I could actually find a place, so bear with me, but I'm listening.
And we started late. You're right on time.
Not a problem.
Just keep smiling, Sheldon. We'll find you that way.
So, I believe the last time I was here, I ended up talking a little bit about what males had to do, or what masculinity has to do in the world and in us as individuals in order to help put us back on the right track. And I wanted to continue on with talking a little bit about what femininity is and what it can do. And I also said last time that I would probably not be able to give the best explanation of it because I'm not female, but I can give you hints as to what this is all about and what it is. And also how we, or how I as a male can help bring or help create an environment within which femininity can come into its own and reestablish balance within itself. So, I like my glasses. First off, with any discussion of the male and the female, you can't really describe one without the other. They are bound together, and they have to be, because we are not complete without those two polarities or aspects. And they exist everywhere, regardless of whether the relationship is homosexual or heterosexual. The same male and female aspects come into play to varying degrees. So what those aspects are us resonating with two, I guess you could say, two aspects of the Creator in action. And the action is the action of unifying what was, or bringing back into the experience of unification, things that appear or we experience to be separate. So the very necessity for there being a distinction between male and female comes from our original process of division, or separating ourselves from the Creator in terms of what we experience, which produced the male and female polarities. So now that they are here, their very purpose is to understand each other for the purpose of bringing all that back together. So it's impossible to do it without one and the other. So when we look at religious settings, particularly Catholicism, when the feminine is excluded, they, by definition, can do nothing spiritual, effectively. And I made the statement, or we came to the conclusion, rather, that by keeping the interaction between male and female and sexuality, or especially sexuality, out of religious settings, it renders what that setting is completely impotent. for the purposes of actually producing anything spiritual or anything that changes the world or society or anything for the good, anyway. So when you deal with the relationship between the male and the female, and when you deal with sexuality from a spiritual perspective, that's when you can get back to the essence of what this whole process of understanding who and what we are actually is. Can everybody still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, your video cut off, I was just wondering.
Well, you probably can't see us.
No, I can't see you.
It doesn't
I
matter.
can keep going like this, but
Yeah.
just letting you know.
Well, Sheldon, I don't know where he is.
So, based on having said that, any questions or reactions or comments to what I just said before I keep going?
Yeah, because we were saying a few weeks ago that when they were selecting the new pope, and we were talking about how first of all they were unbalanced because it was just males, and then second of all they were unbalanced because they were celibate males,
Homosexual male.
and then third of all it's unbalanced because of that. So, you know, three strikes against you.
Celibate males don't really exist. Definitely not in religious settings. Well, maybe they do, but it's 1 in 10,000 or something who really actually adhere to that. And even then, they may not necessarily need to anyway. But yeah. So celibacy and keeping yourself removed artificially from sexuality actually does not do anything productive if you don't have an understanding of the spiritual root of that in the first place.
But
Especially because it's enforced. Yeah.
Celibacy in itself, when you look at it from a spiritual perspective, it is an effort to produce on your own spiritually. And that's why you come up with all these off-the-wall things, these theories and these theological concepts that doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
Because in order to produce something spiritually, there has to be masculine and feminine energy. So to separate that is a conscious effort to disconnect from the spirit world.
Well,
Yeah. Because the only way to reconnect through the spiritual, to the spirit world is through sex, but through the reality of what sex is and the spiritual essence of what it is. So when we say, or like I call my website and the stuff that I write, hard knowledge. That word knowledge, and it's on the tree of life as well. That word knowledge is the essence of what sexuality is.
Yes.
So if ever that phrase has come up where you say you knew somebody in a biblical sense, and you like to make a joke. Oh, I knew him or her in a biblical sense. Yeah. It's talking about sex, but the essence of what that actually is.
Is that also the tree of knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the difference is what you choose to have intercourse with.
But that's the interplay between understanding and wisdom that produces knowledge, awareness. Knowledge brings that about, rather.
Yep. And just to let you know, in the back of the room, it's a little bit, I can hear you, but it's a little bit broken up.
Okay.
I don't know where the microphone is exactly, but somebody have a question in the back?
No, that's a baby.
Oh. So, the very interaction between men and women on a physical level actually forces that sexual urge to come up at some point. And when it does, males have the responsibility to deal with it from an inner perspective or spiritual perspective, if they want to use it for the purpose of actually bringing enlightenment to themselves and to those around them. Now, naturally, or at least at first, in our spiritual infancy, we don't really have an understanding of the true power of what sexuality is. And we tend to let our ego dictate how we deal with it or how we approach it. But the more you begin to grow in spiritual understanding and awareness of who and what you are, the more you can approach to your own sexuality. So with males and females, it's a little bit different. And it relates to what I was just talking about a second ago, the overall purpose of what this experience is and how we bring it to a conclusion. Your video's going. Yeah. I think. And the difference can be described and is described as the difference between electricity and magnetism. And I'll try to explain that as well as I can, but essentially when we're looking for, if we look to this experience that appears to be on the outside of us, and we are looking for the masculine and the feminine principles, they can be found in what we describe as electric and what we describe as magnetic. And I'm going to try to draw something and I'll explain that in a second, but essentially those two things, or those two polarities, describe the interaction between male and female that goes on inside of ourselves, as well as what goes on between person to person on an external level. So does that make sense just so far?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Everybody still hear me okay?
Yes.
Your
Yeah.
video's gone and I hear an echo of myself.
Yeah, sorry. I'm working on the sound.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So I wanted to get into the distinction between males and females in terms of the essence of their sexual ability. Because the way in which males and females come together also relates to this overall process as well. So masculinity and electricity, that describes it, that it is designed to bring about a transition from one state to another.
For security purposes, this call has been terminated. Please contact your moderator and verify the time and date of your conference call.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So the essence of male sexuality, when we deal with it from a spiritual perspective, is transition. It is about transforming one thing into another thing. And in that sense, you can kind of picture like electricity moving down a wire or something, or a bolt of lightning. It's always about bridging the gap between two different things that appear to be separate. And this is where we get, in geometry, we get a straight line. And it said straight lines are masculine, curved lines are feminine. And it also relates to electricity and magnetism. But, so basically, all that means is the essence of what male sexuality is the ability to transcend one experience or one form of society or one something and carry us into another. So that's male. So the female, which is magnetic, is the ability to build and maintain and make sure that that society, whatever exists at the current time, actually runs properly. Which is why societies where females are in charge and they do all the running stuff usually run better. So I'm going to draw something in a second, but if you can kind of picture that, what the essence of what masculinity is a transitional energy. The essence of what femininity is a sustaining energy. So let me switch over really quick and I'll draw that for you. So it should pop up in a second. Did everybody get my little white screen?
Nope.
Oh, it's coming.
Okay. There yet?
Sorry.
Nope.
No, it's just, looks like it's just spinning.
Oh, I see it. What's up? Could be just our internet's kind of slow. It is kind of rainy here today. And I can keep going whether or not this works or not. Still no?
Nope.
You're
Okay, I'll try again in a second. Then I'll come back to me. If that works, actually.
You could go really low tech and draw on a piece of paper.
As I say, you got a whiteboard and marker or a piece of paper and a pencil?
That
That used to work.
used to work. Yeah, I could do that. I'll hold it up to the camera. Yeah, let's do that actually.
It's so novel, huh?
Assuming my video comes back, can you all see me?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
You still can't see us?
No, I can't see you.
What on earth?
As long as you can see me, though.
When it works, can't we see ourselves in the bottom corner or something? So
Yeah.
you should know.
Okay, so
I don't know what to do.
just drawing this stuff. Okay. So you're back. Can
Okay.
everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Are the words flipped or?
No, they're right.
No, they're right.
Oh, okay. So that's a good way to visualize it. So the electric is the male, is the straight line, and the magnetic is the female, is the curve. So in physics, when you look at the relationship between electricity and magnetism, it is always this. Wherever you have electricity flowing through a wire or whatever, you always have a magnetic field. It might be weak, but it's always there. So wherever you have a magnetic field, you always have some sort of electrical impulse. It might be very weak, but it's always there. So this is what we're talking about when we say males and females are inseparable. Like, to try and separate them is it's crazy. Because what you're trying to do is eliminate something that accomplishes the very purpose for our existence as males and females, as distinct males and females in the first place. And that is spiritual, complete ignorance. So like I said, the male aspect of sexuality is one of transition. So let me draw something else on here real quick. So let's say we have society or an idea or something or whatever that exists at this level. Male sexuality, or the spiritual essence of what maleness is something that takes you from one level into the next. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the female, or the essence of what femininity is from a spiritual perspective, is something that maintains and builds whatever is there at the current time. Whenever it transitions to a next one, then it comes back into play. And it maintains and builds whatever is there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So you can think about it like there's a sheath of magnetic energy surrounding its electrical flow. There's these platforms that go, or circles that go up and down forever. Now, since we're talking about sexuality, this is also a physical diagram of the process of sex. And that's exactly the physical mirror representation of the spiritual essence of what's going on. So males get these stupid ideas all the time and go like, look, all right, I got an idea. And women go, no, that's dumb. Or, that's a good idea, let me help you out, or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And society and spiritual groups are built or maintained, or they're taken to the next level and built and maintained. Now, I'm going to put this down really quick. So, having said that though, both physical males and physical females contain within them aspects of both. And we have to, otherwise we wouldn't be able to operate, like we wouldn't even be able to think, because thinking is a magnetic and electrical process. Physical males resonate more greatly with the essence of what masculinity is. So even though physical males contain within them both feminine and male aspects, they contain a greater degree, or they are connected to a much greater degree to what the essence of male sexuality and masculinity is. And so I appear outwardly male. In this lifetime, my job is to learn to master what maleness is. Same females. Even though you possess both male and female aspects within you, you resonate more greatly with what the essence of what femininity and female sexuality is. And therefore you are outwardly female. And because we are outwardly male or female or both, and I'll get to both in a second, that's how the interpersonal interactions become part of this whole process, as it resonates outwards from what is inside of us. So in other words, getting our relationships right on an external level between person to person is part of the whole process of getting ourselves internally correct. Because what we appear to see outside of us is nothing more than a reflection of what is in us. So in a religious setting, when you forcefully separate these two, male and female, you screw up this whole process. You take a chunk out of it and you disrupt nature itself. So what we are trying to do is create a space where we have the time and the space to actually understand what it is about our essence that we are here to master, learn how to perfect, so that we can resonate outwards from our interactions the proper relationship between males and females, and the proper interaction in ourselves between the males and females that are in us. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes.
Okay. So I mentioned that I would get back to both male and female, or androgynous. The creator is an androgynous being. And I said that in any sort of religious setting that wasn't Hindu something, I would just be kicked out, obviously.
Stoned.
Yeah, or something.
See how we dealt with it? We dealt with it very well.
Yep, you guys are good. I can say everything. Almost. So, however, having said that though, if there was any side of this polarity, male or female, that we could say the creator is most like or more like, it would be female. However, the essence of what the creator is beyond male and female. As it approaches the creation of physical reality, it begins to create distinctions in itself for the purpose of being able to build all this stuff. So, as I've said, what masculinity is the property of transition, or the ability to take one state and transform it into another. So, that is kind of why males are not the default human being. Because you can make a human being from 2 egg cells, X and X equals human. And the little Y chromosome is tiny, almost insignificant compared to the X chromosome. Males die quicker than females. We get more diseases. The reason I'm bringing that up is because what maleness is the active principle of transforming in society and spirituality and bringing back the unification of creator and creation. But the fact that we are separate, or the experience of separateness from the creator, is an illusion. So what maleness is temporary. It only needs to exist in the extreme form that it does. And extreme, by extreme I mean we all need to be outwardly male, as opposed, or female, as opposed to androgynous, because of this illusion and the fact that it's still working in our experience. And given a great enough time scale, the period of separation from the creator is insignificant, even though it might not feel like it is because we're in it. So this is why what masculinity is like it's not as fundamental as what femininity is, although it is just as important. Because femininity is more closely related by default to the essence of all of this experience before it even became physical. This is why we say things like women are more intuitive, or women are more spiritual than men typically are, just naturally. Because what your femininity is has an easier time resonating with what the creator and what reality is. Yeah, in the...
Okay. What you just described in terms of the insignificance of the male is how, according to the way the scriptures are set up, breath itself is feminine, because the Shekinah is the feminine aspect of the creator. So breath itself is feminine, spirit is feminine, and by virtue of that, is not 100% feminine, but it's overwhelmingly feminine to the extent that it is what keeps order in this thing that has been created.
Yeah,
Well, but can you not also, between the two, then, I don't want to say the masculinity is more unstable, but in a certain sense,
It is.
it would be, because it needs, just for the want of a better vocabulary, movement, etc., toward something, right?
Exactly.
If the essence of femininity is the wholeness that was, hence balance, etc., so the given that there's the illusion or whatever you want of separateness, then the masculinity properly understood is key to that
Continue to flow.
toward the balance, the fullness of that balance.
And when you say the masculine is unstable, it's simply because the masculine chooses to be unstable in terms of trying to fix everything the way he perceives it should be, as opposed to the way it actually is.
Well, okay, but unstable in the sense that it's an interim phenomenon, for want of something better, a better way to say it. You know?
well, I think you're talking about two separate, yeah, you're talking about like the masculinity has to be unstable in the sense that it can't be rigid and stuck in one cycle. And as Richard's talking about, masculinity has created its stability by the fact that we have chosen to deal with this situation out of our ego rather than connecting to our own spirit.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I guess, okay, just what runs through my head too, listen to this. I'll just say it this way for however it needs to be corrected or qualified. So the way back to wholeness, so to speak, depends very much on the masculine function,
Yes.
but guided by the intuitive understanding, but guided by the advice, if you like, of the feminine understanding of where it's all headed or what it's all for, etc.
So we screwed it up in the first place. The masculine is what screwed it up in the first place and keeps it in that order. I mean, the masculine is what keeps it all out of whack. Is when you start talking about the whole essence of truth and what enlightenment is, the most difficult people to get to understand it, accept it, see it, are males. It resonates almost immediately with females. And that in itself undergirds what you said earlier, Nick, about the female being more spiritual in a sense than the male is. Because she is more open to who she is and who all of us were created to be. More so than we are.
Yeah. That's why in the movie Avatar, which is mythology, the spiritual leader of the village was the female. Yeah. And it was the male who handled all the war stuff. Because part of what maleness is also to be able to create an environment that can be stable. Because you can't have transition without stability. Otherwise, you're always worried about making it stable, and you can't think about anything else. So,
Boy, you just described the world.
Well, so then the transition is toward, to create an image, I guess, is what we would traditionally call a higher,
that's what it's called.
what?
But that's not the objective. The objective is to return to it, not to create it. It's already been created.
Well, but I mean, that's the ultimate illusion. It's all just what do you call it? It's like the universe, right? It's not a flat thing. Okay, anyways. The words
What was
are
I going to say? Oh, so now having said that, when males get it right within themselves, and well, my thinking was when you look throughout history and you think about spiritual people, there are hardly any women mentioned. And it's partly because other males don't like the fact that women's mentioned because they don't know how to deal with themselves. But it is also partly because males put the pieces together quicker. And not necessarily quicker, but they do it in a way so that it becomes an active, conscious process, as opposed to the female just knowing. So males come onto the scene and get their spiritual junk together, and then they become the spearhead, so to speak, for transitioning society or the world from one state to another spiritually, from one understanding to another. So that's why it's usually males that are in figurehead positions, or that appear to be the origin of this. That is in no way to say that females cannot be, but it's usually a male who does it first, outwardly anyway. Does that make sense though?
Yes.
It does.
So that's why if you look at the legends concerning Yeshua and Mary, it was Yeshua who realized himself first, and then he went and got Mary. And helped her to release things she needed to release, and helped her realize herself. But it's more than just that physical interaction. It took place spiritually before you became physical and all kinds of stuff. But it's all related to the relationship between male and female. So when we look outside ourselves and see the opposite sex or whatever, the fact that we appear to, or we experience ourselves to be separate, is a quality of this illusion that we're participating in. So that is why Yeshua and Mary had to come together before their purpose could be complete. Those two were the embodiment of the Christ energy or principle in the earth at that time. Or that's what they represented anyway. They could not have done it separately. And the fact that the history books, and if you've ever heard the word history broken out as his story. Mm-hmm. So males in their fear and ignorance like to control stuff, and I mentioned that last time. She was basically left out of the official story, most definitely by the church, but also by culture and time. But if you go back and read some of the oral traditions that were passed down through the original Gnostic Christians, she had just as much influence as he did, and was every bit as powerful as he was in terms of his ability to affect reality. Yeah.
She actually influenced him more than he influenced her. If you really read the stories that were written down concerning that, because she pretty much directed what he did and didn't do.
I was just going to say that in any public forum, you're in deep trouble.
But it's true.
You need
Oh, but,
Jeshua and Mary Magdalene to complete.
well, but even starting with Mary, his mother, she kind of told him what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you want to think about it on a surface level and not even thinking from a religious perspective, though, think about all the things that Jesus said that were in red. They were definitely not what you would hear from the typical male walking around during that time and in that area. Everything he said definitely had a very, very feminine presence to it, if you think about it.
The spirit. That's all he talked about.
No, but I mean, I think it's instructive to so understanding the essence of what it is to be masculine in the male leads to the male knowing the importance of the female to, I suppose you could sort of say, keep him, not on track, but
Balance, maybe.
balanced.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the female is just out there wandering around being more or less, whatever, what do we want to say, alive? Balanced? Not balanced necessarily. So she needs to be, the female needs to be brought into that relationship too, to be able to play her proper role.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it works both ways.
Sustained.
The female can be out there kind of wild and unbalanced too.
I mean, I don't like my words because you can take what I just said and just with a little bit of a nudge, you turned it into half of what the churches say the wrong way on Sunday, but still. Because it's then what's that essence, what's that role? We still go back to the core, but you're just reiterating the validness of the relationship, not the validness, the importance, I guess.
The
Well,
value.
yeah.
Necessity,
The
the
value of it.
necessity of
Okay.
it. Yeah, the necessity of it, more than value, it's the necessity of it. Otherwise, there's no transition, there's no completeness, yeah, okay.
Well, we always think of it, well, I know we've said in here that if Yeshua went to Mary and helped her, servant can't be greater than his master. So who's servant who? It just depends on how deep you want to go into the original, or like what spiritually was actually taking place.
No, but I think it's just to say on a simple level, he understood he needed her, and he needed her to be, what do you want to say, fulfilled in her essence, to help him be what he had to be.
Yeah.
Is that a fair
But she
way to say
needed
it?
him to
Well,
be able to be that.
She
too.
couldn't, yeah, to be released, so to
Yeah.
speak. Yeah,
Right. So he was operating under the knowledge, or within the knowledge that needed to take place. And the secret behind that was that needed to take place because Mary needed it to have it take place. But it's circular.
yeah.
One cannot be without the other.
And that's the balance.
So I don't know if any of you read. There's some books out there. But I have it. No, I don't have that one. But it's like the Gnostic Gospel of Mary, and the descriptions of the traditions that came down from her. And she every bit as powerful as Yeshua is usually described as being. But anyway, so around Yeshua were 12 disciples, right? That we usually talk about, who are signs of the zodiac, who are archetypes of human being, personality, and spiritual dispositions. Around Mary was the same. And nobody anywhere ever talks about that, but Mary had her disciples just like Jesus did his.
Right.
Now they met together, but by virtue of the fact that Mary was female, she could minister to females better. By virtue of the fact that Yeshua was male, he could minister to males better. And that's how it works. Where was I going with that? So I'm throwing up a little diagram here. In the center, oh yeah, here's what I'm gonna draw. in the center, once Yeshua and Mary come together, the two intertwine. They both are participating in this transitionary process, right?
Mhm.
So this is what DNA is.
Okay.
And this is where, when you look at things like the caduceus, if you've ever heard that, it has two serpents
Right.
intertwined around each other,
Yeah.
going upwards. So the male and female cannot be separated. Well, we try, but if this is going to be complete, they can't be separated, and they have to understand one another.
Sheldon has a question.
Well, Nick, since you started, and I was going to keep it to myself. Also, when you were talking about electricity and magnetic, that's electromagnetic. What is electromagnetic? Electromagnetic is light. Okay, so when you look on the light spectrum, you look how vibration works as far as the low vibration and the very high vibration. On the one end, for a very low vibration, the light that we actually see, which is dominated by masculine, which is also at the root chakra. As you move up the chakras and the vibration becomes more and more, and you don't have such just a straight line, which you explained the line is the male, then you have many curves and you have short lines when you have a mixture of more of a balance between the male and the female, which is you go up and you get closer and closer to purple, which is a higher vibration of light.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that's all when you add electricity and magnetic together is electromagnetic. So my point in saying all this still isn't yet that all of this stuff that was known by the ancients that was spiritual or just explaining stuff that we're just beginning to, we begin to know like thousands of years later.
That's why purple is represented
Yeah.
by royalty.
Yes.
That makes sense.
So
In porn shop.
if,
In porn shop.
when you have,
Just saying.
That's true.
so to make a magnet using electricity, you have to sort of coil the wire around whatever.
Yep. You gotta take a piece of metal and wrap the wire around it. That's how
So,
you make an electromagnet. Just take a coil of something.
well, I'm trying to think about that in terms of male and female. What is that? When you take the electricity to make the magnet?
So you can take a nail and wrap some copper wire around it, and that's like, middle school science. But what you're doing is through the application of the electric and the electric field to the metal, you're causing a transition to occur within the whole piece of the nail,
Yeah.
within the whole nail. But it takes that initial application of that electric and magnetic current running through the wire.
Well, yeah. Well, I understand the science of it, but I'm trying to think about it in terms of the spiritual aspect.
Right. So if you have,
So, well, let me ask this question. Where does transgender people come from? What is that all about?
so just like we are here, or I am here to perfect and understand what maleness is, and females are females so that they can perfect and understand what femaleness is.
Yeah.
People who are, well, I'll deal with androgynous first. People who are both are here to perfect and understand what that is. Because that and androgynous people always had special places within
Every,
indigenous communities.
except
Always.
Yep.
And they were always like held in high regard and
Yep.
usually put in spiritual like positions. So because what they represent is the original unity that we came from.
Right.
And internally in themselves, they have a whole, their whole experience and process may be totally different. It may come much more easily with them. So transgender is a little bit different because transgender is transitioning from one to the other. And there was something on YouTube I was watching a long time ago where it was a guy talking about I forget, it was either Cherokee or it was Native American. I think it was what's the ones that are like out in the desert? The
Zuni, Hopi.
Hopi. I think it was a guy talking about the Hopi prophecy and stuff like that. And as he was talking about just various topics, he came across the issue of transgender people. And he said the Hopi response to that, or description to that, was that there were people in the world who think they know more than the Creator. And they tell the Creator, no, I don't want to be one way, I want to be another way. So what he was talking about was the internal spiritual environment that exists within someone that is at odds with what they are and feels like there should be another way. So transgender is talking about an internal struggle, is essentially the result of an internal struggle to understand yourself and dealing with it in a way that doesn't really directly interface with the essence of what the self is. And it deals with it in a way that only the ego knows how to. Yeah.
But does that not represent religion? That's exactly what religion does.
Yeah, it is what religion does.
So that's sort of the magnet created by the electricity kind of scenario.
Well, you could think of the nail as the world or society as a whole. So when an individual or a group applies their electric and magnetic fields to the nail, society as a whole begins to change and become more spiritual, more magnetic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because the relationship between magnetic and electric describes everything. So whenever you have a magnet, well, you know how the Earth has a magnetic field around it?
Yeah.
And the Earth is also spinning. If the Earth stopped spinning, that magnetic field would disappear. So what we just described, the act of spinning, is actually the physical representation of the relationship between males and females. They spin around each other, just like I drew in this little intertwining thing here. Just like in the yin yang, the black and white thing, it indicates a spinning motion. When you can sort of figure out where this is, or how what is in you is reflected outside of you, you can begin to piece together how all this stuff works. So galaxies are spinning, our solar system is spinning around the center of the galaxy, all the planets are spinning, the sun is spinning, everything is spinning because everything is a physical representation of the dance between male and female, which is what this physical is. Now, some things are out of balance. Some planets in the solar system don't even rotate on the same plane as the solar system. All of this is indicative of turmoil, that spiritual turmoil that expressed itself physically during our spiritual past, or whatever we could call it. So anyway, check it. The Earth is spinning, the galaxy is spinning, and whenever you have something spinning in space, let me draw something real quick. You have the same relationship set up. There's always a line of energy shooting out of the top and the bottom.
That's the black hole.
Yeah. Anything you see in space that's spinning. So if the Earth was here in the center, and this magnetic field was out here, well, let me draw something else on here, just to make it a bit more clear. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
So, if the Earth was here in the center, if you looked at it, its magnetic field, I believe it shoots out of the top and like reconnects on the bottom from all sides, and it's spinning at the same time. There's also something coming up out of the top and the bottom, but that's extremely weak, very, very, very weak. And I would have to go look this up to see if there's any scientific stuff that's been done to look at it. But whenever you have magnetics, you have to have electricity. Whenever you have electricity, you have to have magnetics. You can't separate those two. Yep.
But it's also called the poles, which is a subconscious representation, a subconscious remembrance rather, of the straight line. You remember when they was talking about the pole reversal?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, has anyone heard the term pole shift
Yes.
before?
Yeah.
So, like around 2012, everyone was like, oh, crap, pole's going to shift.
Yeah.
And actually, it still could, like any day now. For whatever reason, we're just at that point in history where like everything could just explode right now. And there's a reason for that, actually. Because we are around the time period of 2012. But anyway. So a pole shift. So the Earth is sitting here in space. And we have the north magnetic pole, which your compass works on, and the south. These have been moving significantly to the point where everything that we use, the technology that uses, that is based on magnetics that we use to help us navigate has to be like recalibrated. Airplanes, airports, all that, it can't use straight up and down because it's not straight up and down anymore. And it is moving at a fast rate, which is why they say we might be due for a pole shift because it usually speeds up and then just bloop, flips entirely. Now this has happened in the past. And there are, based on the mythology and stuff that ancient cultures have recorded, people were around when it happened. And it goes back before the last ice age and everything. And there's certain things they say about what happens during the period of transition. But essentially, the Earth is spinning around, but guess what? The people on the Earth influence this process as well. So, depending on our own spiritual development, we can sustain the planet during its transition. So just like, and this is kind of what critical mass is. Critical mass, Mom, you were just talking about the wrapping the nail with the wire. Critical mass is the point at which that nail becomes fully magnetized as a result of applying that tiny little electric force. It grows and grows and grows with every time you loop it, and then at a certain point, it's done. The thing is magnetic.
Yeah.
And strong enough to actually lift stuff. So we, through understanding how our male and female selves interact, and through bringing back into balance their interaction, magnetize the planet. Now, the actual strength of our own magnetic field, if you measured it scientifically, is extremely, extremely weak, just like with our electric field. But it doesn't matter, because you only have to get it right, and then it resonates with everything else. It's kind of like a tuning fork. If you have two tuning forks that are tuned to the same frequency, and you hit one, the other one will begin to vibrate. It works the same way. You only need one. Critical mass can be one person. if he or she or they, in the case of Yeshua and Mary, get their junk together, it reverberates outwards and affects everything else.
But that's what Abraham was talking about.
I went
When
there.
he said, if it but one, will you spare the city? That's because when you look up city, it actually talks about the diversity of the world itself.
And you know what? I want to say that I believe that the only reason we haven't seen something like a magnetic pole reversal so far is because of us. And not us specifically necessarily, but us
I believe that.
people who do this.
Yep. That's the reason I constantly say we have to do this as if no one else is doing it. And we have to make decisions about the direction we are going in, regardless of the egos that get coming into play. You know, we have to override that.
Yep. So by the act of bringing ourselves into balance, we prevent the reset switch from being hit. And the earth itself responding in a way to wipe out everything that's on it because it knows it's not good. There's not even one person in the city that's worth saving, and it's done.
And Nick, that one person is not one person. It's the Yeshua and the Mary.
Yes.
It's the male and the female. It's just not the dudes that
One person in the ultimate sense. Yes,
spiritual androgynous person.
right. Because it takes the male and the female to complete the one being.
Right.
And it doesn't even have to be two individuals. It could be one body or group of people that are seeking to bring themselves together to reconstitute the one original being, the one person. So, when we look at maleness, femaleness again, and we think about them in terms of electric and magnetic, electricity is always about transitioning from one state to another. And magnetism is always about drawing together and building. What was that?
Truck. That microphone's very sensitive.
I was just from watching people speak on YouTube and stuff. Today we would say that in general, we would say that the world is, well, the part of the world that considers itself modern, is run on a system of patriarchy, where the men are in charge. That isn't necessarily what spiritually is going on. In fact, it is not what spiritually is going on. Men are only outwardly in charge because spiritually they are ignorant and spiritually they are boys. The word material comes from the word mater, which means mother. So the fact that we are stuck in materialism is actually indicative of the fact that we are, or men in particular, are stuck in a feminine way of thinking. In that they don't understand the essence of what their maleness actually is. And they're not using it. They're forcing them on themselves and on the world something that they are not. Well, something that they're not designed to do, and throwing it all out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So when men get their junk together, it becomes females who come into the forefront. And we would say we would be in a matriarchy. So when men deal with the essence of what masculinity is, females run the show. When men fail to do that, they run the show. It's kind of counterintuitive.
They're running in the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as I said before, you don't ever try to control something that you're not afraid of. And what this system that appears to be patriarchal is afraid of is what femininity forces them to deal with in themselves. And now I'm speaking generally, and particularly with regard to the religious setting. Because nowhere is the enforced artificial patriarchy in place harder than in the religious setting. When, as I said, when men begin to deal with themselves and bring themselves back into balance, they stop trying to control stuff because we're not afraid of what's in us. At that point, females begin to take a more active role. And as a male, speaking for myself, if there are no problems, I don't want to do anything.
I agree.
Run the stuff, I'm just gonna go sit over here and just chill because that's what I do.
But you know, that was indicative in the Hopi villages and villages, well, indigenous people in general, that the females ran everything. And when they were telling the males what to do, what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, after the hunters and gatherers, after they hunted and gathered and came back, it was actually the elderly females who had the wisdom. But you don't read that in the history book.
You can hear about it from them, though.
Oh
But
yeah, oh yeah.
when do we ever listen to them?
Wait a minute. Oh, never mind. So I'm supposed to be sitting under the tree drinking coffee while somebody's in the
beer.
kitchen cooking?
Beer.
No, you can do that once your job is done.
No, you put
Hey,
beer.
I brought you what you gotta cook.
There you go. But society doesn't work that way anymore. But even within that, and even though I speak a little bit facetiously, if there's ever the application of our own ego to the situation, we are in the wrong as males. So even if we're like, all right, we just caught you this food, go cook it. If you need help, we are obligated to provide it. Or if, like, there's nothing in place saying that you have to do this. But the idea that women have to do certain things and men have to do certain things comes from that original understanding of that balance. Now, it's kind of a perversion of it because we've applied our ego to the situation.
Right. Well, to put it in layman's term, if you don't help, then she might go Lilith on you. So then she'll be out of balance.
Yep. And as a male, that is our fault. Because we saw the opportunity to help bring something back to balance. We said no. And we imposed our ego onto the situation. Then she loses her mind because she knows she's right and she can't convince us. Because we just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
That sounds very accurate,
So that's on us
actually.
as males to get over ourselves and recognize when we have to be males, when we have to deal with stuff. So, I hope that paints a clearer picture of this relationship.
Very much so.
It does.
So where does this head of the household stuff come from?
Say it again.
Where does this head of the household stuff come from?
Oh,
How'd they take that little, like, what piece of something did they take and run off with?
essentially, that's the fear. I'm the head of the household because I will control you, and you will be confined to whatever. But that's stupid. It just is. It evolved out of the patriarchy, quote unquote, that we have going on. But at the same time, actually, just as we were talking about before, men are physically built stronger on average, and for a reason, so that we could be the ones outside doing the stuff that is our job to do. When we apply our ego to the situation, we begin to enforce those artificial boundaries, like, all right, I'm the head of the household just because I do this. No, that's just your job. How can you be the head of the household if you're telling women to stay in the household? They're the head of the household if they're running it. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, we let y'all pump your chest for a while.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. Well, unfortunately, it creates something, but spiritually, it's out of balance. It's whack.
So where does the women being submissive come in? Is that out of balance too? Or what is that?
We throw it out of balance to the extreme degree that we take it. But women being, and the idea that women should be submissive, quote unquote, is an example of how we throw it out of balance. Yeah, I got you.
That came from the Greek philosophy. When Paul wrote, he was influenced by the Greeks. And if you look at the Old Testament and look at the females there, especially Sarah in particular, she was not submissive in the sense of what we call submissiveness to Abraham. She, in actuality, if you want to call it quote unquote head of the household, she was definitely it. So that whole concept of submissiveness is a in the sense that we use it, it's a European concept.
Yeah. And there is a difference between submissive and receptive. So women are receptive in the sense that they seek to draw to themselves what it is that they want. But they are not submissive because they are the ones dictating what gets done.
And we
Does that make
want what we
sense?
want, yeah.
Yeah, it's being open to what's being offered. It's being open to what's being pursued, rather, if
Yep.
indeed what's being pursued is balance or light. And that openness has been interpreted as submission when it isn't.
Yep. Oh. Actually, yeah, so the women in the room, what other questions about the origin of this stuff that you experienced do you have, actually? Because I feel like that's where we should go. Because by virtue of the fact that you become more aware of the spiritual essence of what it is we're dealing with, how these male and female polarities should relate, you will then create a more powerful resonance for that than I would, or than the males in the group would. And if I can think of something, I'll think of something.
Well, I kind of feel like, especially in the last, I don't know, forever, men
100,000 years.
have dictated to women what they should, oughta, could be, that women have just lost themselves in that.
Very good point.
I mean, so how do we How do we take back what is rightfully ours to take back? I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But when you began to realize who you are in relationship to what Nick has just talked about, then how do you do that? It is the desire to do it. There is no step one, step two. Your desire is what brings it into play, and then when that's challenged, you know it, and you have to override the challenge. You have to face that challenge, because everything that we understand and everything that we desire to incorporate in, for lack of a better term, this life this journey, I should say, maybe, there's always a challenge to it. There's always resistance.
Well, yeah, challenge.
And you have to face the resistance and overcome it.
Sometimes facing that resistance is like just giving in and say, well, okay, whatever you think. And goes back to the same, we're in the same boat. We lost ourselves again.
And that's what I'm saying, that you don't do that. You don't go back to that and say, whatever, man. No,
But
you take a stand.
Can you also say it in a relationship with someone else? Then this is part of, I suppose you'd say, a male role is to nurture or help that openness, that liberation, support that. And if you're not in a relationship, then it's that male aspect of yourself that you have to better understand. So you're allowing yourself, so to speak, through the maleness to be female. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do.
It's easier to start with a relationship because that's where we see it. And I'm not saying that it takes a man to make a woman whole, but it takes many times one to make the other.
It takes both to make.
You know, that's why I guess I've always liked the phrase, but then I had some experience in my life that maybe I need to let go of. That, you know, it's the two of you against the world kind of thing. It's a little bit that attitude. Because when all's quiet, it's the one helping the other, which means you have to understand each other more and then help each other. It's all quite not convoluted, but, you know.
But I think one of the dangers in that, and one of the reasons Nick probably asked the females about it, is that we're okay with females and them searching to find out who they are, as long as they do it within the boundaries that we set. You know, there cannot be boundaries set.
Right.
You have to let people be who they are and meet them where they are. You see what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And face who they are, accept who they are. Because if you, anything else is the maleness playing God, shaping a female in his image. Marry yourself.
But you know, the minute you try to be or to come to know who you are and you know, just experiencing things, there's that resistance, especially if you have a partner who feel that they can, again, try to control you, keep you in this box when it's convenient for them. It's hard. And it's hard for us to be ourselves.
Can I say something? It's hard for me to say that that's difficult if, I guess, I mean, and of course I'm probably the only single person in this room.
No.
But, which I, you know, good with that. But I haven't found, in some aspects, I haven't really found it that difficult. And I think being here today kind of finally helped me understand why I am the way that I am, because being submissive was never something I could accept. And which is probably why I have been single for so long, and I'm good with that, because being controlled is what I'm not.
Right.
So I've never found it difficult to come within my own self. If you can't accept me for where I am and who I am, kick rocks.
But again, you're not married.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I've been
It
in
does.
relationships.
It does.
Well, for you,
For me,
maybe.
yeah, it
But I've
does.
been in relationships, and either you accept me or you don't.
And
No, but
And-
but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Too, because this does something. This is like, I mean, I grew up in a family of duty, honor, country. That's this thing. It's a bond. And there's a certain If you have a relationship that's building and it can't reach a certain threshold, you should separate, maybe. But when you're in a marriage, it's like you're coming at the relationship, excuse my French, ass backwards. The
Well, yeah,
commitment's
because-
there, now you gotta decide what the substance is gonna be.
And I think it's
And in the
different
beginning,
because
the
you
substance
started.
is artificial, it's physical, it's all this fun stuff. And
Yeah.
then when you get into 24/7 part, and aches and pains and everything else, now, you know.
But that's because you guys started at a point where we were taught something different.
Yeah.
And I think that's different. I
that's
think when
different,
I
yeah.
get married, it'll be totally different
Right.
because I have always been to the point where I know how to compromise, but for somebody to not accept the fact that I am a free spirit, I can't be with that person. And I've always, so
Well,
I'm coming from it from a different perspective.
Okay, but I
So
also,
when I
think
get
in
married,
in
it
that
will
mix
be
too, I do
different.
agree that I've never thought, I've always thought, and the Europeans were more enlightened, so to speak, in my understanding growing up. You're supposed to be married in your 20s, have kids in your late 20s.
Mhm.
It's all this formula stuff,
Yes.
and yet no two of us are the same.
Mhm.
And my sister now has a relationship in her late 60s and early 70s. But the earlier ones weren't gonna work, didn't work.
And let me say something before I get past Richard on, and all those things that we sort of set up, those systems, and those rules, quote unquote, like you should be married by this, you should have kids by then, all that stuff is actually, if you go trace it back far enough, is an attempt by us to keep some boundaries in place so that in the hopes that we could at least be around each other long enough to begin to deal with the internal stuff. But unfortunately, boundaries can't be in place because in order to deal with the internal stuff, you got to be free to be able to do whatever you need to.
But I mean, I would never say that a single, sorry, the whole thing about being single or married it's just.
It's totally different, I agree.
No, it's much more of an illusion of one's right, one's wrong, one's good, one's bad, all that stuff is, it's so.
And that's not what I'm saying. I'm
The
saying
same
it's coming.
energies are at play in both situations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just coming at it from a different perspective. I feel like my parents had to grow to a certain point in their marriage because of the
That's
norms
what I'm
where it
talking
was
about.
then.
Right.
That's
I've
what I'm
never
talking
about.
been that person.
Yeah.
And so for me, my relationships come at it from a different perspective
Right.
where I don't feel like I have to compromise who I am as a woman in order to make some man happy. First off, you need to be happy before we
That's
get
right.
together and then we grow upon that
Okay.
choice of each
But
other.
it doesn't
Like I
mean you
said.
don't face the same kinds of challenges in different ways in dating. I have a feeling we've probably faced some similar challenges dealing with male attitudes.
That's-
We're in a slightly different time period, a
That's
different
what-
culture, but we're facing some of the same issues, where men can't handle very easily a female who's comfortable with herself and won't accept being dominated.
And then I don't date those men.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so we feel the effects of it.
Yeah,
though.
we do. Yeah.
I'm gonna see. First of all, when we talk about relationships and marriage, the culture tells us that the male dominates the marriage. That's what we grew up with.
Yeah.
However, and when I was in college and we were dealing with all this civil rights stuff, it was the male who was dominant. But in my relationship with Phoebe, I have never tried to dominate her. It has always been an opportunity for her to be who she is, not within my boundaries. And even when she set boundaries for herself, I challenged them. Because, and that may be where Malika has got their attitude from, of not being submissive or controlled or kept within boundaries. Because there was, and I can appreciate what you're saying, because when you have been in that relationship and you begin to see who you are and deal with that and the other person doesn't, then that's unequally yoked. You see? And when you're unequally yoked, something is going to have to give. Either, and when Malika talks about compromise, if you're unequally yoked and you give in, you're not compromising. You're submitted and you are denying who you are.
You're settling.
Yeah, you're right. And you can't do that. You have to make a decision. See, when you say it's hard, Evelyn, it is hard. And if it were not, everybody would be doing it. You know what the hard thing is? We've been taught that we're supposed to be together for life.
That's not true.
And that's not true. When I felt the urge to come into this, what we call ministry, I remember clearly when Phoebe said to me, I'm not going to live with a preacher. Because she didn't believe that I was called. Now, when I got to the point where I had to do what I had to do, I said to her, you can live with a preacher or we can separate. You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And never would I force what I do on her to be a quote-unquote first lady. That's crazy. And never would I allow her to force it on me. And that's how the relationship has been, since we've been married. And she said, no, whatever, I mean, that's just the way it's been. And she is the one, the head of our household. I do what she says. Because it makes more sense than what I think most of the time. So that's, it's this single thing, I think the reason Janice and Malika are where they are is because you are representative of the change.
But on what you're saying with that, because when Malika was talking, this resonates so true. Because sitting back and seeing the change, you have a segment of women that are where Evelyn is. And it's like they see the change, they know what the change is, but they're still kind of comfortable in that box. I don't want to take this next step that's going to put me out there where I am, what I am, the Diana of the divorce. Diana's happy divorce. But Diana knew why she had to go to what she go to be this point. And then you have this segment that's where they are, they've never been okay, never been married, but it's okay, know who they are and comfortable in their are. But then you got the segment that, it's Misery Love Company trying to push them in to say, baby, this is what a woman's supposed to be. You're supposed to be married. Instead of embracing that I see in you. I can't really understand it because I'm conditioned different. I can't understand it's something different about you. I want to be that you, but I'm over here in this.
You know what I see in that? What I see in that is the Shekinah, the feminine energy, saying, I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to be who I am. And if the male cannot handle that, then he has a problem. And that in itself is what draws the male into the electromagnetic relationship. Because when you really think about it, if the male really cares, then he begins to try to understand where you're coming from. And begins to defer to you based on where you're coming from. And when that happens, you have the illustration that Nick gave with the circle and the arrow, growing together. But if that does not, and I think that that's why you have a lower percentage of marriages now. Because we have reached a point where the whole energy is changing. And with that shift, then the thoughts have to shift as well. When I say the thoughts have to shift, you cannot be like, I need to be married, I don't want to be alone. That kind of thing. If you look at even in the scriptures, there's no such word for alone, because you're never alone. But the idea of that has been pushed so hard until right now it's very, very difficult, to move away from it, depending on which generation you're in and the environment in which you grew up. It makes a huge difference in that kind of environment. And maybe my difference is so much for females is because I came from a female-dominated environment. I don't mean dominated instead of running stuff, but I mean in terms of numbers, and in terms of the ideas of what we call head of household type stuff. My uncles, my mama's brothers, none of their wives worked. because they didn't want to. It wasn't, they wanted to stay at home. You see what I'm talking about? So that's the environment, and everybody don't grow up in that kind of environment. But we are changing it. Nick talked about critical mass. Critical mass does not have to be reached with Claudia's generation or generation after her. Critical mass can be reached right now by virtue of our desire for it. And I do believe that we are teetering on disaster, but the thing that's holding it in place is what we are doing. That's what holds it in place. So we have to sort of step up the game and stop building walls that make every attempt to keep females in their place and males in their place type thing. And just let the energy flow. Just because if you don't let it flow, there's going to be an explosion.
I have a question for you. I'm glad this conversation is open today, the dialogue is there, because it's a generation of what young ladies that's what we're talking on, that is being embedded in them, that that's what the female is supposed to do, get married and have babies. And there was a conversation, and this one is on open radio every day, that the mom wants a husband so bad that the girls are praying every day. That's their prayer. Ask God to send their mama a husband, because she wants a husband so bad.
Okay.
And when it's out there on the broadcast, I'm like, I'm really tired of hearing you talk about you want a husband so bad. But if you listen to what you're instilling in the girls, and you got your girls praying to God for to send you a husband, but it's like that's what her church is teaching also.
And that doesn't matter. What they teaching doesn't matter. That's what has always been taught. What matters is what we do in this room. Because we influence the world. There will always be groups or attitudes like that.
Okay.
But we cannot submit to that by virtue of saying, well, we need to change everyone. Critical mass is not changing the attitude of people on the radio. Critical mass is changing the attitude of people in this room. When we come together in Philly, I understand. When you look at the abortion doctor, the child who knocked the mic down, when you look at the abortion doctor, when you look at all the things that are going on in Philly before I was going there, there's a need for us to be there. We don't necessarily go to a place and deal with individuals. Janice made a statement. This is what we actually do is missionary work. But it's depositing energy, changing energy, drawing energy. And as a result of that, we got a request now to come 10 minutes out of Philly into Camden, which we probably want to fulfill. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. It's not, because you see, I cannot travel the journey that I'm on and at the same time I don't want to use the word, I'd be concerned to the extent that it slows me down about what's going on in church. I can't do that. I can't concern myself with what other pastors do. Because when I look at myself now, it is far beyond pastor in terms of, knowing the journey that we are on at this moment. And to recognize certain things. I was talking to Ron this morning, and we talked about this submission thing in terms of female stuff, what we're talking about now. And one of the things that we were talking about is I recognize things that we need to do, but I don't necessarily know why. For example, when we were at the house and Nick taught, I knew that he was supposed to. He was supposed to do that, but I didn't see it until later, and they shall be led by a child. When we come into session, Barbara is the facilitator. Didn't understand why until now. The female is been placed where it's in the place rather where the female is supposed to be. It's not Barbara's chosen because her name is Barbara or because she's intellectually strong. That's not it at all. It's all about spiritual energy. Can you see that? Yeah. And if we can change it in this room, Then we put it in the macro, and it began to change the course of female energy everywhere. And we've seen results of that. So it starts right here, without regard to what goes on in church. Don't cry.
I just thinking about something that's just wanted to throw in, and with regards to this transition in the way we think about all these things, as a male, the one thing that you have to deal with in order to learn how to be a better male is the fact that your female counterpart will leave you at some point. And as a female, the one thing you have to deal with in order to be, or perfect what femaleness is be at peace with the idea that you will be alone, quote unquote. Because it's difficult to be alone, quote unquote, for everybody, but it's more difficult for the feminine energy to be alone. Males can check out of relationships even though they're still married and be okay. But that creates instability and it creates tension between the female and the male because the female cannot, the feminine energy cannot have that, cannot be cut off like that. So when I say males have to be comfortable with the fact that the female will leave them at some point, during the development of the male, at some point, if we're heterosexual, we all like have a crush on a girl or whatever. But women mature faster than males do. And thank God, actually. At some point during the process, most likely, she will outgrow him and then move on. And then what's supposed to happen is he is supposed to look at himself and be like, all right, during this interim period of our separation, what can I do to myself to make myself into the person that she may like? And that's the essence of what's going on. And obviously it might not always happen, but the point is during the interim period, the male works on himself. Same thing with female. Maybe. He should. During the period where the feminine energy is figuring out herself and figuring out what she wants and what she knows is good, she has to recognize what is good and what's not and learn how to shut down or stay away from what's not good and always be taking the next step up with whatever transition or whatever next person she's in a relationship with. If that makes sense. So obviously it doesn't always play out like that, but that's the spiritual process that we're going through. As it is reflected in our actual relationships. So the one thing that males have to deal with is their fear the one thing that is at the root of males' attempt to control females is to keep them around, even though they don't want to be, all the time. And a male will do that because he does not know how to deal with himself when there's nobody else around. And yeah, that's the root of a lot of stuff. But
Well, it explains how women got to be property.
yeah. So you couldn't, now I said you can't even legally leave me. Such is the degree to which I am ignorant of my maleness and the essence of what it is. So. Aloneness has to do with our feeling of where our attention is. If our attention is focused outwards and we don't see anybody around us, then we get caught up in the idea that we are alone, and we get to generate emotions from that idea. If our attention is focused inward, we can begin to perceive how much else we have access to. And we don't have to generate those emotions because we know we have access to other things, to connections of things that are present, despite nobody being physically there. Now, obviously, you don't have to quit cold turkey and just never be around anybody again, because very few people can actually do that. Some can, but only because they recognize the need to deal with themselves. So all those like hermits up in the mountains in China and stuff, of which they are male and female, they would be an example of somebody who's recognized this. Like, to not see another person for years at a time, that would drive most people insane. Because most people are in the point in their overall journey where they're focused on what is external to them and drawing from what is outside, what appears to be outside them. But when you move up to the mountain and become a hermit, it's because you recognize that what is inside you is vaster and greater than what appears to be outside you. And you begin to draw from that. Anyway, I want to move us to a new topic. Does anyone else have any other questions about what we talked about?
I want to know what Mary was teaching those women.
Oh.
Because I read a little bit about that, and I remember something about the moon being involved in the menstrual cycle and some other interesting type things, but...
Yeah, so, I guess I could open that can of worms up a little bit. So, because what femininity is, deals more with building and maintaining reality as it exists, Mary would have been much more concerned with, and Yeshua too, but Mary would have been teaching the women how to move in tune with all the reality that is present, and all the rituals and all the stuff that comes along with that. So, whenever you look at mythology, or the overall theme in mythology is that when men want something done, they just do it. Or it just happens or something. And then they go through this journey and do all that stuff. When females want something done, they do magic. So females are the witches, quote unquote, they're the ones over the pots. It's Isis doing the magic to put Osiris back together. It's never men doing all the magic stuff. Maybe in some cases, but speaking generally. And the reason for that is because females are more in tune with what this reality is. Because as I said before, the word material comes from the word mater, which is Latin for mother. This is feminine, and therefore you have a greater degree of control over it when you learn how to move with it. So part of what Mary would have been teaching the women that she was in a circle with was how to do that. Part of what Yeshua would have been teaching his men would have been how to deal with themselves. Now there's some overlap because, as I said before, we both contain male and female, but a greater degree depending on whichever we are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There you go.
I'm going to go dig into that now.
No, I want to, before you go to another topic, I wanted to touch something. The whole concept of jealousy is selfish because it's a belief that affection that belongs to you is being given to someone else, property. You know, it's like you own the affection of the person, and the jealousy itself makes you, whether it be on the female or the male part, it makes you feel like you own that person. and you are trying to convince that person that they're your possession, and if you can do that, now you have put them in a box or in a fence that they cannot get out of unless they come to an understanding of who they are and are willing to come out of it regardless of the consequences. In most cases, there are serious consequences, or there can be serious consequences for ending or moving away from a jealous relationship. And jealous relationships is just not boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. Jealous relationship also exists in congregations. Jealous relationship exists in organizations. It doesn't matter. The seed is there, and we have to make sure that the seed doesn't grow. I mean, think about what happened with the jealousy comes through when Peter talks about the idea of Yeshua was spending more time with Mary than with them. You see what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And he's chastised, for saying that and brought back into check. So the balance have to be brought there, even in that regard. And really, I would like for you to go to another topic next week. Not today.
Okay.
So let me say this, everybody who's listening, we will not be available on the 22nd, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, 22nd. We will not be available on the 22nd because we will be in Philly, okay?
Anything else?
What are we getting into next week?
Oh, I don't know.
That's what it is. A new
I thought
topic.
you had a topic prepared.
He said, he said a new topic. Then we'll go get into next week, right?
My topics consist of 2 to 3 sentences, maybe, and then I just go from there.
Okay.
We'll see what comes up.
Okay. You ready?
Who's on this? Oh.
Shema Israel. The electric and the magnetism are one. So let it be.
Amen.
Nick Sheldon, I spoke with George earlier.